The envelope was standard government issue, thin white paper, with the recognizable Blue Eagle logo in the upper left corner. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, the kind of crisp, windy day where the leaves scrape across the driveway. I had just come inside from winterizing my rose bushes, my hands still smelling faintly of damp earth and crushed stems. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, leaned against the kitchen counter, and tore the envelope open, expecting the usual quarterly update or a minor adjustment notice. Instead, I pulled out a Medicare summary notice. My eyes scanned the bold black print, moving down to the grid of recent claims. There, clearly printed in the center of the page, was a summary of services rendered over the past 14 days. The total amount billed to my account was $4,200. The amount covered by Medicare was identical. But it wasn't the dollar amount that made my chest suddenly tighten. It was the description of the services. Right there in indisputable black and white, the paperwork stated that I was currently receiving intensive daily end-of-life hospice care in my home. I stood there in my quiet, empty kitchen, perfectly healthy, breathing. Normally my heart beating with sudden, heavy thuds against my ribs. I read the line again. Routine home care, hospice. According to the federal government, I was dying. According to this piece of paper, a team of nurses and palliative care specialists had been visiting my house every single day for the past 2 weeks to manage my terminal pain. The coffee cup in my hand began to shake, rattling softly against the saucer. I hadn't seen a doctor in 8 months, and that had been for a routine physical. But as I stared at the claim, a vivid memory flashed through my mind, striking me with the force of a physical blow. Exactly 2 weeks ago, we had hosted a family dinner. Right before dessert, my daughter-in-law had casually asked for my wallet, telling me that the local pharmacy needed to update my profile and re-verify my Medicare number to keep my prescriptions active. Before I go any further, let me ask you a quick question. Where are you watching from today, and have you ever had that sudden sinking feeling where a single piece of paper makes you question everything you thought you knew about someone you trusted? Let me know in the comments below. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am 71 years old, and I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I live a fairly quiet life these days. I reside in the same 2-story colonial house that my late wife Eleanor and I purchased, back in 1982. When you live in a house for 40 years, it stops being just a structure. It becomes a living record of your life. Every scratch on the hardwood floors tells a story. Every perennial in the backyard was planted with purpose. 4 years ago, I lost Eleanor to pancreatic cancer. Losing your spouse is a profound, earth-shattering quiet. You don't just lose the person you loved. You lose the ambient noise of your life together. The sound of her humming in the kitchen, the way she would leave the morning newspaper folded on the dining table, the smell of her vanilla lotion. All of it vanishes, leaving you in a house that feels entirely too large. Since her passing, my world had narrowed, but it was a comfortable narrowing. I spent my days woodworking in the garage, tending to Eleanor's garden, and managing my investments. I was proud of my independence. I paid my own bills, cooked my own meals, and kept my mind sharp. I was not a wealthy man by the standards of the world, but I was secure. And I earned that security through 35 years of meticulous, exhausting work. I spent my entire career in hospital administration as a senior compliance auditor for a massive regional health network. My entire professional life was dedicated to data, medical records, and insurance compliance. My job was to find the ghost in the machine. I spent decades hunting down fraudulent billing, unearthing upcoded patient charts, and catching systemic errors that could cost the hospital millions in federal fines. I lived and breathed CPT codes, federal regulations, and explanation of benefits forms. When I retired at 65, I happily locked all those spreadsheets away. My pride and joy is my son David. David is 42, a hard-working, earnest man who works as a regional logistics manager for a shipping company. His job keeps him on the road a lot, bouncing between distribution centers across the Midwest. 3 years ago, David married Chloe. Chloe was 34, bright, energetic, and worked in what she called patient outreach for an outpatient clinic. When she joined the family, I was thrilled for David. He had been single for a long time, and Chloe seemed to bring a spark of organization and modern efficiency into his life. She was always planning things, always arranging dinners, always offering to help out, but standing in my kitchen with that Medicare statement in my hand, I suddenly realized that her helpfulness might have been a mask for something deeply sinister. Looking back, I can see the cracks forming, but at the time they just looked like a daughter-in-law trying to care for an aging parent. It started about 6 months ago. Chloe became intensely interested in my administrative life. It began under the guise of modernization. We were sitting on my back patio, drinking iced tea when she first brought it up. She told me that I was living in the dark ages, because I still received physical mail. She insisted that I needed to go paperless for my own security. "Arthur," she had said, leaning forward with a look of deep concern, "mail gets stolen all the time from mailboxes. People can steal your identity. Let me help you set up online portals for all your banking and your medical insurance." I had politely declined. I told her I liked paper. I liked filing things in my cabinet. I liked holding the documents in my hand. She had smiled, but I noticed a brief flash of irritation in her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that disappeared as quickly as it arrived. A few weeks later, she offered to take over managing my prescriptions. She said that since she worked in healthcare administration, she knew all the tricks to get discounts and could easily coordinate my refills. Again, I declined. I only took a mild statin for cholesterol and a blood pressure pill. I was perfectly capable of driving to the pharmacy myself, but she kept pushing, testing the boundaries of my independence, looking for a way in. The warning signs grew more specific. David had casually mentioned during a phone call that Chloe was stressed about her student loans and credit card debt. He said she was constantly looking for side hustles, talking about how the healthcare system was a goldmine if you just knew how to work the angles. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just assumed she was ambitious. But the most alarming moment happened 3 weeks ago during our Sunday family dinner. We had just finished eating a pot roast I prepared. David had stepped out onto the porch to take a work call. Chloe was helping me clear the plates. She casually pulled her phone from her pocket and said, "Arthur, the pharmacy called me on Friday. Because I'm listed as your emergency contact, they said they have a flag on your file. They need to update your Medicare beneficiary identifier, or they might reject your refills next month. I can just take a picture of your card and email it to them, so you don't have to deal with the hold times." It sounded so plausible. It was exactly the kind of bureaucratic annoyance that people hate dealing with. In a moment of unguarded trust, wanting to appreciate her help, I pulled out my wallet and handed her the card. She placed it on the counter, snapped a photo with her smartphone, and handed it right back. "All done," she said brightly. "I'll take care of it." I didn't think twice about it until the Blue Eagle envelope arrived. I carried the Medicare summary notice to my heavy oak dining table. I sat down, turned on the overhead chandelier, and spread the paper out under the light. I retrieved my reading glasses from my shirt pocket and put them on. I didn't just read the words. I analyzed the document the way I had trained junior auditors to do for 30 years. I ran my index finger down the column labeled Services Provided. There were the specific alphanumeric billing codes. To the average citizen, they are just random strings of gibberish. To me, they spoke a very clear, very dangerous language. I saw the code Q5001, that is the billing code for hospice care provided in a patient's home. Then I saw T2042, that is the code for routine home care, billed on a per diem basis. According to this grid, a company called Lakeshore Comfort Partners had been billing Medicare roughly $300 a day for my care. I picked up my phone and dialed the Medicare fraud hotline. After 30 minutes on hold listening to terrible elevator music, a representative finally answered. I gave her my information. She confirmed it. According to the federal database, a physician had certified me as terminally ill with a life expectancy of less than 6 months. The election of hospice benefits form had been signed and processed exactly 14 days ago. I asked the representative for the address of Lakeshore Comfort Partners. She gave me an address located in a commercial business park on the south side of Grand Rapids. I thanked her, hung up the phone, grabbed my car keys, and drove out there. My heart was pounding, but my mind was coldly rational. I pulled into the business park, driving past a dentist's office, a dry cleaner, and a flooring showroom. I found the suite number the representative had given me. It wasn't a clinic. It wasn't a medical office. It was a UPS store. The official address for the hospice agency billing the federal government for my terminal care was simply a rented mailbox in a strip mall. I sat in my car, staring through the windshield at the UPS store logo, the realization washing over me like ice water. This was a phantom agency, a shell company. What would you have done in my place? Would you have picked up the phone, called your son, and demanded an explanation? Would you have confronted your daughter-in-law right then and there? If your own family did this, could you stay quiet? I chose to stay quiet. I knew that if I yelled, if I accused her without an ironclad case, she would simply lie. I knew how these people operated. If I tipped my hand, Chloe would log into whatever system she was using, delete the digital trail, and claim it was just a massive clerical error. She would tell David that I was getting old, that I was confused, and that I was unfairly accusing her of a crime over a simple administrative mix-up. She would turn my own son against me. I needed absolute proof. I drove home, made another pot of coffee, and set to work. I had not done a deep dive audit in 6 years, but the mental pathways were still there. The next morning I called a former colleague of mine, Sarah, who was now a regional director of compliance at the hospital. I didn't tell her the whole story, just that I was looking into a suspicious agency that had contacted an old friend of mine. I asked her if she could help me pull the National Provider Identifier Registry data for Lakeshore Comfort Partners. 2 hours later, Sarah emailed me a secure file. I opened it on my laptop. The company had only been registered to bill Medicare for 4 months. But the most crucial piece of information was the ownership data. To operate a medical billing company, you have to register an LLC with the state. I went to the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs website. I paid the $10 fee to pull the corporate filings for Lakeshore Comfort Partners. The document downloaded to my screen. I zoomed in on the registered agent and managing member. The name printed on the legal filing was Thomas Vance. My blood ran cold. Vance was Chloe's maiden name. Thomas was her younger brother, a 28-year-old guy who bounced between jobs in retail and construction. He had absolutely zero medical background, but the address listed for the registered agent wasn't Thomas's apartment. It was David and Chloe's house. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, as the entire ugly picture came into focus. Chloe was using her insider knowledge of healthcare administration to run a massive fraudulent billing ring. She was setting up shell companies under her brother's name. She was using her position, or perhaps her access, to elderly people like me to harvest Medicare numbers. Then she was forging physicians' signatures, enrolling perfectly healthy seniors into phantom hospice programs, and collecting the daily reimbursements directly from the federal government. It was a classic, brutal Medicare fraud scheme, and she had decided that her own father-in-law was a convenient, gullible target. But as I sat there, the purely financial nature of the crime faded, replaced by a wave of intense, suffocating grief and anger. This wasn't just about stealing tax dollars. This was a profound personal betrayal, and the cruelty of it cut me to the bone because of Eleanor. Hospice isn't just a billing code to me. When Eleanor was dying, we utilized a real hospice service. I remember the nurses who came to this very house. They were angels walking on this earth. They bathed my wife with gentle hands when she was too weak to stand. They managed her morphine so she could sleep without agony. They sat with me in the middle of the night, holding my hand, guiding me through the darkest moments of my life, allowing Eleanor to pass with dignity and grace. Chloe knew this. She knew how much I revered the hospice nurses who had helped Eleanor. Yet she was willing to take that sacred, compassionate system and turn it into a dirty piggy bank to pay off her credit cards. She was mocking the very institution that had given my wife peace. And then the true danger of what she had done hit me. It is a fact of the Medicare system that when a patient elects to enter hospice care, they are officially classified as terminal. By federal rule, once you are on hospice, Medicare will deny any coverage for curative care. The system assumes you have accepted death and only pays for comfort measures. If I had slipped on the icy driveway tomorrow and broken my hip, or if I had suffered a sudden heart attack, the paramedics would rush me to the hospital. The emergency room doctors would pull up my file, see that I was officially enrolled in hospice, and Medicare would refuse to authorize life-saving surgery or aggressive treatment. By fraudulently coding me as terminal, Chloe hadn't just stolen my identity. She had effectively placed a secret "Do Not Resuscitate" order on my life. She had stripped away my medical safety net. She traded my potential survival for $300 a day. I sat alone in my dining room, put my face in my hands, and I wept. I wept for the sheer, terrifying callousness of it. I wept because the woman my son loved had looked at me, a man who had welcomed her into his family, and seen nothing but a mark, a string of numbers to be exploited. But after a few minutes the tears stopped. The grief crystallized into something hard, sharp, and perfectly calm. The devastated father-in-law stepped aside, and the veteran auditor took the wheel. I was going to dismantle her, but I was going to do it so thoroughly, so legally, that she would never see the sunlight of a hospital administration building again. I needed to build a trap. I had the state registry documents. I had the forged claims. But Thomas Vance was the name on the LLC. If I went to the authorities right now, Chloe could claim that her brother had stolen her address, that she knew nothing about it. I needed undeniable proof that Chloe was the architect. I needed her to admit her involvement, and I needed David to hear it. The tragedy of this situation was that my son was going to have his heart broken, but it was better a broken heart now than being dragged down as an accessory to federal fraud later. I began my preparations quietly. First, I compiled a massive digital dossier. I scanned my Medicare summary, noticed the LLC registration documents, the NPI registry data, and the CPT code breakdowns. I drafted a meticulous chronological report of the fraud. I then contacted the Office of Inspector General hotline for the Department of Health and Human Services. I did not use the standard online form. I used my old professional contacts to get the direct email of a regional investigator in the Detroit field office. I sent him the complete encrypted file, explaining the situation and telling him that I was currently securing a localized admission of guilt. Then I set the stage. On a Thursday afternoon, I picked up my phone and called Chloe. I didn't sound like a sharp former auditor. I let my voice drop. I sounded tired, slightly confused, and anxious. "Hi, Chloe," I said, putting a slight waver into my tone. "I'm sorry to bother you at work." "Arthur." "No, it's fine," she answered, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "What's wrong? You sound upset." "I got this strange letter in the mail today," I said, rustling a piece of blank paper near the phone receiver for effect. "It's from Medicare. It says something about comfort partners and daily care. I don't understand it. It says they're paying all this money, but I haven't seen any doctors. I'm so confused, Chloe. I don't want to get in trouble with the government." There was a slight pause on the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. The sudden spike of panic followed instantly by the arrogant belief that she could easily manipulate an old man. "Oh, Arthur, don't worry about that," she said smoothly. "Medicare sends out confusing statements all the time. It's probably just a misprint or a delayed claim from an old checkup. Listen, don't stress your heart over it. Why don't David and I come over for Sunday lunch? I'll look at the paperwork and I can call them on Monday and get it all sorted out for you." "Would you?" I asked, sounding intensely relieved. "I'd appreciate that so much, Chloe. You're always so good with these things." "Of course, Arthur. We're family. Just put the letter in a drawer and don't worry about it." I hung up the phone. Imagine sitting in your own home listening to someone plot against your life and your independence with a warm smile in their voice. It takes every ounce of discipline a human being possesses not to scream. But I didn't scream. I went to the kitchen, took out a roast from the freezer to thaw for Sunday, and calmly printed out 3 identical binders of my evidence. Sunday arrived with a heavy gray, overcast sky. I spent the morning preparing a beautiful lunch. I roasted a chicken with rosemary and lemon, mashed some potatoes, and set the dining room table with Eleanor's good china. I wanted the environment to feel incredibly domestic, incredibly normal. At noon, David and Chloe arrived. David gave me a big hug, smelling of winter air and cologne. Chloe kissed my cheek, holding a bottle of wine. "How are you holding up, Arthur?" she asked, her eyes scanning my face for signs of distress. "Much better now that you're here," I said softly. We sat down and ate. The conversation was casual. David talked about a new distribution center his company was opening in Ohio. Chloe complained mildly about her boss at the clinic. I let them eat. I poured the wine. I waited until the plates were cleared and I had poured the coffee. The room was warm, filled with the scent of roasted herbs and roasted beans. The trap was fully set. She felt completely secure. "So, Dad," David said, leaning back in his chair and patting his stomach. "Chloe said you got some confusing mail from Medicare, something about a billing error." "Yes," I said, my voice entirely steady. I reached under the table, pulled out my copy of the Medicare summary notice, and slid it across the polished wood toward Chloe. "It says I am currently receiving routine home hospice care from a company called Lakeshore Comfort Partners. Chloe picked up the paper, her eyes skimming it quickly. She let out a soft, dismissive chuckle. Oh, wow. Yeah, Arthur, this is exactly what I thought. It's a massive clerical error. Some data entry clerk probably typed a 9 instead of a 0 on a billing code. Don't worry. I'll take this with me and call their provider line tomorrow. I'll have it wiped from your record. She folded the paper, preparing to slip it into her purse. I don't think you should call him Chloe, I said. My voice had changed. The confused, anxious tone was gone. The timbre of my voice was flat, authoritative, and cold, the voice of a senior compliance auditor. Chloe froze, her hand hovering over her purse. She looked at me, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. Why not Arthur? If we don't fix it, it could mess up your coverage. Because I already called them, I said, holding her gaze, and I already went to the address listed for Lakeshore Comfort Partners. It's a UPS store mailbox in a strip mall. David frowned, looking back and forth between us. Wait, Dad, what are you talking about? A mailbox. I reached under the table again and brought up the first binder. I opened it and slid the corporate registry document across the table. I pulled the LLC filings for Lakeshore Comfort Partners. I said, my words dropping like stones in the quiet room. The company was registered 4 months ago. The registered agent is Thomas Vance. The listed corporate address is your house, Chloe. The color completely drained from Chloe's face. The artificial sweetness vanished, replaced by a pale, rigid mask of absolute terror. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Dad? David said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He reached over and pulled the document toward himself. He read his brother-in-law's name. He read his own home address. Chloe, what is this? She swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the front door. I don't know what that is. Tommy must have used our address without asking. He's always doing stupid things. Arthur, you can't possibly think. I interrupted, my voice slicing through her lies, that a physician's signature was forged on an election of benefits form 14 days ago, exactly 2 hours after you took a photograph of my Medicare card in my kitchen. I slid the NPI registry data and the CPT code breakdown across the table. You billed the federal government for Q5001 and T2042 codes. You coded me as terminal. Do you understand what that means, Chloe? Do you understand the medical implications of what you did to me? Arthur, please, she stammered, her hands beginning to shake violently. It's a mistake, let me explain. The clinic doesn't pay me enough and Tommy owed some bad people money and I just needed a temporary influx of cash. I was going to cancel the hospice billing next month. I swear, nobody was going to get hurt. David stood up from the table. His chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. He looked at his wife as if he were looking at a stranger wearing her skin. You stole my father's identity, he yelled, his voice cracking with shock and rage. You put him on hospice care. David, please, Chloe cried, standing up and reaching for him. It's just insurance money. The government has billions. It doesn't affect his real money. We can just cancel it. Arthur, give me the binder. We can just shred this and I'll unenroll you. We don't have to ruin the family over this. She reached across the table, trying to grab the documents. I didn't move to stop her. I just sat there, my hands folded calmly on the table. You can take those copies if you like, Chloe, I said quietly. But the originals, along with the IP logs from the electronic signature on the terminal certification, were securely transmitted to the Office of Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services 3 days ago. A federal investigator from the Detroit field office already has your file. Chloe dropped the papers as if they were on fire. She stumbled backward, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She looked at me, truly seeing me for the first time. She hadn't seen a retired, gullible old man. She had walked directly into the jaws of a man who had spent 35 years sending people exactly like her to federal prison. You call the feds, she whispered, tears of terror finally spilling over her cheeks. Arthur, I'm your family. I'm your daughter-in-law. You're sending me to jail. Hey, you aren't my family, I replied smoothly. Family doesn't put a secret do not resuscitate order on a man's life to pay off their credit cards. You made your choice, Chloe. Now you get to sit with the audit. The aftermath of that Sunday afternoon moved with the swift, merciless efficiency of the federal government. Chloe left my house in tears, begging David to leave with her. David refused. He stayed sitting at my table for hours, his head in his hands, apologizing to me over and over again. I made him tea. I told him he had nothing to apologize for. Predators do not wear name tags. They wear smiles and they hide behind our desire to see the best in the people we love. 2 days later, federal agents executed a search warrant at Thomas Vance's apartment and at Chloe's office at the clinic. They seized computers, hard drives, and banking records. The investigation revealed that I wasn't her only victim. Chloe had used her position at the clinic to harvest the Medicare numbers of 42 different elderly patients, enrolling all of them in phantom hospice care through her brother's shell company. She had defrauded the federal government out of nearly $250,000 in just 4 months. All of her bank accounts were immediately frozen. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable digital evidence, Thomas Vance panicked and flipped on his sister to avoid a harsher sentence. He confessed that Chloe was the sole architect of the scheme and that he was just a paid frontman. David filed for divorce the following week. He moved out of their shared home and rented an apartment closer to my side of town. The legal proceedings are still ongoing, but Chloe has recently agreed to a plea deal for federal wire fraud and healthcare fraud. She is facing a mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison, along with an order of full restitution that will financially ruin her for the rest of her life. It took me 3 months, dozens of phone calls, and the submission of my own fraud report to finally get my Medicare file untangled. The government eventually scrubbed the fraudulent hospice claim from my record, restoring my standard coverage. The bureaucratic nightmare was exhausting, but it was worth every second to reclaim my autonomy. Has someone you trusted ever made you question everything you thought you knew about them? Share your story in the comments below. And if you found value in this story of justice, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you more stories like this. It is spring now in Grand Rapids. The harsh winter has faded, and Eleanor's garden is beginning to bloom again. I spend my mornings out there, pruning the roses and feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. David comes over for dinner every Sunday. We don't talk about Chloe anymore. We talk about his work, about baseball, about the future. He's healing, and our bond is stronger than it has ever been. He knows now that his father is not just an old man waiting for the clock to run out. There's a strange assumption in our society that aging makes you weak. People see gray hair and a quiet life, and they assume it means a soft mind. They mistake kindness for vulnerability. They forget that before we were old, we spent decades navigating the sharp edges of the world. We survived careers, tragedies, and the relentless grind of building a life. Chloe looked at me and saw an easy target, a lonely widower who wouldn't notice a few extra papers in the mail. She forgot that I spent my entire life learning exactly how to read the fine print. I lost my wife, but I never lost my mind, and I will never surrender my dignity. I built this life with my own 2 hands, and I will protect it until my dying day. And when my time finally does come, it won't be documented on a fraudulent invoice in a rented mailbox. It will be on my own terms, in my own house, surrounded by the truth.